Hello, hello, and welcome back to Break the Clutter Cycle with the Maximizing Mama, the limited time private podcast series dedicated to helping you understand why your house keeps getting cluttered and messy despite all the organizing tips, the cleaning methods, the routines, and the habits that you've tried. Now, I want to start off by asking if it ever feels like your mind is just as cluttered as your home. Like, no matter how many times you tidy, you're right back to feeling overwhelmed and defeated. Or if you have ever started cleaning up your house because you felt stressed. It could be that your mind is a mess, and so you're inadvertently trying to clean up the physical mess. Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about why all that inner clutter, the mental and emotional clutter, leads you right back to square one. Before we get started, make sure that you are signed up for our free masterclass, 6 Hacks for a Tidy Home and a Peaceful Life. It's happening live on Zoom on January 16th, and there will be a replay sent out to everyone who is registered. So if you want to eliminate your stress, put an end to the constant chaos, and free up hours of time every single week, this is a masterclass that you cannot miss. Now let's get into our show. In our last episode, which was before Thanksgiving, we talked about what it looks like when the clutter and the mess comes back for the 5th, the 10th, or the 20th time. No matter how much you have cleaned and tidied, decluttered, rage cleaned, organized, no matter what you've done, the clutter and the mess keeps coming back, and how you start to think that it's your fault. And we also talked about the hidden reasons for why this keeps happening. Well, today we're breaking down how this all leads you right back to the very beginning of the clutter cycle. Because let's face it, you've been trying everything to get your house in order and to simplify your life, but nothing has worked. So now you're back to feeling overwhelmed. And then the mental chaos, the emotional baggage, and the digital overload perpetuates those overwhelming feelings. So you end up avoiding the physical messes. Well, let's start at the very beginning. If you've been following along with this private podcast series, you know that there are many different types of clutter. There's mental clutter, which is the unfinished tasks in your mind, your constant to do lists, the decision fatigue, the analysis paralysis. It's all that stuff that's in your mind. Then there's emotional clutter, which could be any number of emotions like guilt, shame, regret, fear of letting go, sentimental attachments, or any kind of baggage from past experiences. And there's also digital clutter, which is your overloaded inbox, the endless notifications, disorganized files, never ending phone calls, emails, and text messages, and way too many browser tabs. And all of this digital clutter just kind of feeds the mental distraction and the avoidance. And there's also physical clutter, which, as a side note, the physical clutter can be broken down into 3 different categories. And we're going to cover all of this in detail, as well as a hack for each of them during our upcoming masterclass. So make sure that you have saved your seat before you forget. So those are the overarching types of clutter. And when it comes to the mental and the emotional stuff, when you're experiencing this mental chaos and this emotional baggage on a daily basis, there's a pretty good chance that you're thinking, oh, well, this is just me being stressed out. But the truth is, when your inner world is tangled up, it has a direct impact on your outer world, your home, your routines, your habits, and your ability to keep up with those everyday tasks. So, I want to dive into how the mental, the emotional, and the digital clutter is draining your mental bandwidth and ultimately leading to the physical mess creeping back in and causing your house to become a mess all over again. So, we know that life is busy. I mean, this is not a new concept, right? Most women are juggling work, family, community, health, home, and every little thing in between. And then when you add in a ton of mental to dos, unresolved emotions, and a chaotic digital life, that leaves your brain feeling like it's a browser with 57 open tabs. So on any given day, you're scrolling through emails, suddenly remembering that you haven't paid a bill, feeling guilty because you forgot your friend's birthday, and all the while there's that nagging voice in the back of your head telling you, the house is a mess, why can't I keep up? Well, research consistently shows us that our working memory is limited. In 1956, a man by the name of George Miller did a famous psychology study. It's referred to as the magical number 7 plus or minus 2. And what it shows is that most people can only hold around 5 to 9 pieces of information in their mind at any given time. So if you're trying to remember more than 5 to 9 things, you will have a very hard time remembering or processing anything effectively. Now, here's why this is relevant to you. When your mind is overloaded, it's running on limited capacity because you literally don't have room to remember everything that you're trying to keep in your head. If your mental capacity is at a lower threshold, you will have less mental bandwidth to decide whether to keep something or to throw something away or to donate it. You have less mental energy to put things away when you're done using them, and you might avoid sorting through that box of papers or tackling the pile of clothes that have been sitting on your couch for a week simply because you don't have the bandwidth to handle one more decision. So the clutter sits and it grows, and that cycle of stress continues. Mentally, you're in survival mode. If you're stressed about work deadlines or any kind of deadline, you'll be less likely to prioritize decluttering your kitchen counters or your overstuffed closet. And even a quick tidy up might feel like running a marathon. While emotionally, if you're carrying guilt, shame, or sentimental attachments, then letting go of physical items can feel like pulling teeth. It's almost as if each item has an emotional price tag. And digitally, you've got never ending notifications, 50,000 plus emails, and random files scattered on all your devices that just adds to the chaos, taking your focus that you could otherwise be using to maintain, to tidy, to clean, and to organize your home. Now, you might be thinking, I can see how the mess in my mind affects my home, but how does the mess in my inbox make my living room cluttered? Well, on the surface, it might seem unrelated, but here's why they're connected. The overwhelm that you feel every time you check your 50,000 emails, or every time you scroll through social media, or you swipe down on your phone notifications, that overwhelm doesn't just magically go away. It lives in your mind and your heart until you clear it away. And that will just spill over into how you handle your physical tasks. So if you're already feeling stressed or emotionally maxed out, that makes it easy to skip your real life chores. And before you know it, the laundry basket is overflowing, toys are scattered everywhere, and the dishes are piling up in the sink. So think of it like this. I want you to nod along right there at home if you can resonate with what I'm about to share. You're at home on a weekday afternoon and you have the house to yourself, which means you can do any number of things on your to-do list. You could put laundry away, clean off the kitchen counters, declutter your entryway, make phone calls, or pay bills. But suddenly, you hear a notification go off on your phone. So you unlock your phone, you swipe down to read the notifications, and you feel a sense of dread, seeing all these things that are calling for your attention. You tell yourself, I'm just going to reply to this text, and then I'm going to go right back to putting the dishes away. But then before you know it, 30 minutes have passed and you find yourself scrolling through Nurse Hannah videos on TikTok. Well, this happens because the overwhelm and the dread that you felt just from seeing all those notifications, it hijacked your attention. And the emotional clutter can do the same thing because emotional baggage is heavy. When you're weighed down by worry, regret, or guilt, well, then any additional task like cleaning a countertop That feels monumental. So you end up putting it off until later. And by the time later comes around, the mess has grown and taken over an entire room. What's really happening here is the clutter in your inner world keeps you stuck in a cycle of what I call inaction reaction, where you're stuck in this inaction and then eventually you end up reacting. So instead of proactively handling the mess, you find yourself dealing with it only when it's critical, like when guests are coming over in 10 minutes or when you just can't stand the chaos for one more day. And that is how the clutter cycle restarts over and over. So, as long as you're not addressing what's going on inside, then the outside is going to reflect that inner chaos. And it doesn't end there. The negative self talk and thoughts like, I should be better at this, or why can't I just keep it together? Well, that kind of inner dialogue piles on even more mental and emotional stress, which causes you to avoid the problem altogether. And the more you beat yourself up, the less likely you are to face the physical clutter because who wants to do something that makes them feel bad about themselves? And that is how a messy mind and a messy home become a vicious cycle. You feel guilty for not cleaning, which makes you feel worse, which drains more energy, and that leads to more procrastination and more clutter buildup. And this weight is just going to build over time. So every time you see a disorganized closet or a pile of papers, that's another tiny little ping of guilt or frustration. And then if it stays that way for months or even years, it can turn into a cycle of burnout, where even the smallest chores start to feel huge. Things like loading the dishwasher, folding a basket of clothes, or decluttering a doom box in the corner of your living room, they suddenly feel like you're climbing Mount Everest. You might even start avoiding them because you know you will only end up criticizing yourself. But here's what I want you to remember. None of this is your fault. Those feelings, the guilt, the shame, and the frustration, those are valid feelings, but they don't prove you're failing. They just show that you're overwhelmed and that you're juggling too much without a clear plan forward. Because remember, clutter is never about laziness. It's not a personal shortcoming. It's just that you're lacking a system that fits your lifestyle and your habits. So you could be overloaded with your schedule, with emotional baggage, or with 50 to dos spinning in your head. And if you don't have a roadmap to navigate all of that, well, it's no surprise that the physical messes build up and then the feelings of inadequacy will naturally follow. So remember, the guilt, the shame, and the frustration are signs that your emotional load is a bit too heavy, not that you're failing. And by learning to lighten your inner load, whether that's through journaling, mindfulness, or even using the hacks that we're going to go over during our masterclass, you can open up space in your mind and your heart. And that is when you finally have the energy to address the physical mess, one simple step at a time. So, we've discussed how the digital clutter can hijack your attention and how the emotional baggage can lead to feelings of inadequacy and self criticism, which makes you not want to do anything at all. And when all of these negative emotions and the mental overload and the digital chaos, when all of this together starts piling up, that is how you can slip right back into phase one of the clutter cycle, the paralysis mindset. When you're standing in your living room, your notifications are going off, you're carrying around guilt and shame because your house is still a mess, and suddenly you realize, I have no idea where to go from here. I've tried everything and nothing worked. This is too much. So you mentally freeze. And what happens next is self-blame. You start telling yourself, I've tried every trick in the book, but it wasn't working for me, so that must mean something's wrong with me. And then that loop of negative self talk and procrastination keeps you circling, feeling more and more defeated every time the clutter comes back. It's like you're spinning your wheels and never actually going anywhere, which is exactly what leads to a feeling of overwhelm. And that is exactly what we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast series. That sense of, I feel overwhelmed by all of this. Where do I start? But when you're back at phase one, you might be feeling even more overwhelmed than you were the first time because you've been here before. And then you feel like it's all pointless because you start believing that you'll never change and you'll be living like this forever. But here's the important thing that I want you to remember. It's not that you can't change. It's that the approach you're using needs to address the inner clutter and the digital clutter, not just the stuff on your floor or the piles on your counters. If your mind and your heart are weighed down, no amount of tidying, decluttering, or reorganizing is going to stick, ever. You will eventually always find yourself right back here, looking around at the mess, unsure how to tackle it, and feeling like you failed again. So before you blame yourself, remember it's not about you being unable to change. It's about finding a method that finally takes your emotional and your mental load into account. That is why you want to focus on the inner work as much as the outer mess. If you take away anything from this limited time podcast series, let it be that. The inner work is just as important. As a matter of fact, if you can resonate with this clutter cycle, if you have been trying to simplify and get your house in order and free of stress for years, then the inner work is essential. It is non-negotiable. You must focus on the inner work because the mental, the emotional, and the digital clutter is the number one reason why you are stuck with the physical mess, the stress, and the chaos. So that, my friend, is exactly why this is all a cycle and why it can lead you right back to phase one at the very beginning. Because when you go through each of these phases, the overwhelm, the organizing, when your house gets messy again, when you start rage cleaning, when you're trying different methods and then none of it works, you end up blaming yourself and you start to feel overwhelmed because you're not really sure what to do next. But the good news is that there is a way out of this clutter cycle. And that's exactly what this private podcast series and our upcoming masterclass is all about, is to help you finally break free from this constant cycle of stress and overwhelm and frustration. So before we wrap up today, there's one more thing I want to remind you of. Something incredibly important. It's that you're not alone in feeling like this. Millions of women are dealing with the same emotions, the frustration, the shame, and the guilt every time they look around their house and they see the clutter building up again. I know it's easy to feel like you're the only one who can't seem to keep it together, but trust me, there are countless others going through this exact same clutter cycle. So remember, it's not that you're incapable, it's not that you're disorganized. You just have a lot on your plate with family responsibilities, work deadlines, emotional stressors, digital overwhelm, as well as your household in general. And if you don't address the mental, the emotional, and the digital clutter right alongside your physical stuff, it's almost inevitable that you will feel stuck and overloaded. But tackling the mess inside your mind, in your heart, and in your inbox will free up the energy that you need to maintain a more peaceful, clutter-free home that is easy to keep clean. Now, finally, I want to give you a little preview of what's coming next to help you break out of this clutter cycle. In our final episode of this podcast series, I'm going to give a brief overview of the entire clutter cycle, everything that we went over, and the actionable steps that you can take. That way you have one episode you can come back to time and time again. I'm also going to share how you can gain momentum in your home because that is the key to success, way more so than motivation. And I'm going to share what your clutter-free era could look like and how you can take those next steps to break the generational habit of hoarding that likely got you here today. Think of it as the grand finale, where we will tie everything together and give you some concrete steps for moving forward. I'm so excited for this final episode because these steps will empower you to create lasting change, one that goes beyond just tidying up, but instead, it will truly help you pass down a clutter free legacy to future generations. So, again, I want to remind you, you're not stuck in this clutter cycle forever, and you're definitely not alone. You just need a holistic approach that addresses both your inner and your outer world. Stay tuned for the next episode. I promise it will help you connect the dots and put all these pieces into action. Now, one last thing. Our free live class is taking place in 1 week on Zoom to give you 6 hacks for a tidy home and a peaceful life so you can have a roadmap to clear all this chaos from your mind, your life, and your home once and for all. This class is where we're going to tie everything together that we have covered throughout this private podcast series so you can break out of the clutter cycle and put an end to the mental, the emotional, the digital, and the physical clutter. I will put the link to save your seat right down in the show notes. And there will be a replay sent out to everyone who is registered. So even if you can't make it live on January 16th, still make sure to get registered. Go save your seat. I promise you the 6 hacks that I'm going to be sharing are so good. Plus, I'm also sharing a special offer and some bonuses. So get signed up below, and I will see you there live on January 16th. I'll talk to you soon.